Governor Noem with me and two of her cabinet members. Much of the talk around here the last week or two has been about budget, and there's some friction happening between the two chambers and the second floor. And we would just like the opportunity to chat about the budget today. And we have two full days left of negotiations. And, where are you at on this? And could you want to tee us up here on kind of your perspective?
Well, I was this morning, talking about the fact that we were in my office having discussions on policies and budgets, thinking that the public of South Dakota don't ever get to hear this behind-the-scenes policy debate. One of the things that shocked me yesterday is that I had a lot of meetings with legislators. I met with all the Democrats. Then I called a meeting in of some of the key people that voted against calendaring or having a debate on the women's prison. And I couldn't really figure out what the House had against the women's prison project in Rapid City, so I decided to meet with some of them. And when I called those 5 Republicans into my office, they couldn't name a single reason they were against it, other than that their appropriations committee told them to. And I was sitting there, I was just so shocked after that meeting thinking, I know the reason all these projects are important, and my team does, because of the reality on the ground in South Dakota, our communities. We know that our prisons are overpopulated. We know we can do better by giving people mental health services, addiction counseling. But for some reason, these legislators aren't having policy discussions right now. Instead, they're voting against stuff for reasons like one of the legislators said, because I don't want to talk about it. Well, I'm like, well, that's like literally your job. Your job is to have a debate and talk about policy and pass good bills. And we were talking about that, and I said, the public doesn't get to see all what we know in these conversations behind the scenes. I said, let's just do it, have a conversation in a manner that the public can hear why I'm championing building a new women's facility in Rapid City, why I think this gun range that we've been debating is important for economic development and opportunities for, and so that's really what this is, Joe. For me, and my viewpoint is bringing, Jeff in, who's been charged with, running the budget of finance and management to oversee the budgeting process. I put my budget together with this team in December. We started on it back last July and went through all of these issues, and I don't know if that's happening here right now, and I think the public should know that, and maybe even one of those legislators up in the House will watch this and think, I didn't know that. Maybe I should have voted differently.
So the three big, we have an unprecedented amount of federal stimulus coming through, which has sort of brought all of this to a head, I think, or provided an opportunity for you to make some big budget requests and fill some, what you say, are needs that the state should address. So we're talking about workforce housing. There's a $200 million initiative that's sort of caught in the ether right now up here. We're talking about the women's prison, which is $38 million. The I guess grand total of $5 million for the shooting range with authority and general funds. Are those, is the shooting range dead, or where are you guys at in negotiation on those 3 specific items?
On those 3 specifically, so yes, the House killed the investment into a facility out in Rapid City for work release for women to be able to be closer to their families. The vast majority of the women in our Department of Corrections have addiction issues, and they're mothers. They want to be closer to their children, and a lot of the population is from that Rapid City area. So yes, they killed that yesterday. They killed the gun range project, which was going to give us the largest facility to host events and train our kids and give instruction on firearm safety here in South Dakota. So that's dead too. It's still, there's not a budget done. So, if they suspend the rules, make a different agreement on that. The one thing we haven't talked about at all this week in some of these policy debates is the difference between one-time money. We have extra money that can be spent on specific projects. And then there's ongoing spending that they're debating as well. And in my belief, the legislature adopted too high of revenue estimates for the next year. I think our economy is going to struggle in the next couple of years. Yes, we've had one. I heard the appropriations chair for the House yesterday on the House floor say, the good times are gonna last. We're gonna have this great economy for the next several years at least. Well, look at what fuel prices are doing. Today, just what we've seen in diesel fuel increase costs from what it was a year ago to today. If I run one tractor on my farm for a week, it costs me $10,000 more a week just for fuel for running one tractor than it did a year ago. There wasn't a day in the spring putting my crop in that I ran one tractor. I ran 5 or 6 tractors. So you're talking about $100,000 more on fuel costs only for our farmers and ranchers out there if they're running a medium-sized operation. And that's gonna affect our economy when ag is our number one industry. But our appropriations chairman's thinking that we're gonna continue to have people out there spending money and generating sales tax revenue to keep, and so they adopted these high revenues and they're trying to spend it.
It's not what the stock market said either in the last
No,
few days.
it's not. So
last month.
just, I'm trying to be realistic here in what we're doing in a budget. And the debates they're having just aren't sustainable, and they're setting us up to come back here and have huge tax increases in a couple of years, and I think that we need to make sure we have a little dose of reality this week.
Well, there has been 2 proposals, both have died in the Senate. One to reduce sales tax by a half penny, and then yesterday, a bill was a hog house to have a food sales tax repeal. That also died. You've been resistant to that, though. Is that, that's because you don't think things are going to be that rosy that long?
Well, it's just, I think they're setting us up for an income tax. I think that they know when they propose something like that, it's not sustainable as far as our current programs, and they know that they'll be putting South Dakota in the position to have a significant income tax debate within 2 or 3 years.
Isn't the counter to that, though, that could force the government's hand to narrow its scope and make cuts down the
Well,
line?
none of these legislators were here last time they had to make significant cuts at state government. It was a pretty painful process. The lieutenant governor I know was here. And were you here? I know the lieutenant governor was here through those 10% cuts that happened across the board that happened during Governor Dugard's administration. And, they're not debating at all the 6% increase that goes to education and state employees and healthcare providers. But making those cuts is a painful process, and none of those legislators that are proposing, it's always interesting to me, proposing these significant programs are offering up savings. I had one legislator in my office yesterday that said I should be building housing for low-income people and children that don't have homes, and I said, well, did you bring a bill on that this session? And they didn't. So a lot of times they, throw things out to me and they haven't offered a solution on where to cut. So if they're looking at reducing spending for state government, I didn't see those House appropriators bring forward big bills to reduce programs this year. I didn't see it, and if they brought some. And Larry can give a little perspective, I suppose, on what it's like in state government. But I offered tax reductions this year. I offered tightening our belt, and we've reduced full-time employees in state government. We've let leases go on state government. We're doing that, but to force something like that's just setting the state up for an income tax.
Well, in 2009, I think it was, when we had the stimulus package, and I was pretty proud of our state. We had one-time additional revenue, and we made the decision then to spread that revenue over 3 years. So that took us to 2012, thinking we'd bridge the gap in that dip in the economy. We all recall in 2012, when Rounds left, he proposed a 5% cut. Dugard revised that to 10% across the board cut, so that was painful. And I've said it to the governor, if the legislators now felt the pain of what that was like trying to come up with 10% across the board cuts, they'd be a lot more conservative in their approach now, thinking we're riding a wave.
Well, and they would adopt lower, I think that if they would have gone through those kinds of cuts, to know every lobbyist in the state shows up when there's a cut to their program. And we knew there would be a lot of discussion over the spending this year, which is why we started months and months ago having meeting with legislators. I had the leadership team and appropriations team in here yesterday too, and I said, I started with phone calls with all of you. Everything that's in my budget is something that a legislator brought to me and said, this is important, because I didn't want to have this kind of disagreement. The only reason housing's in my budget is because I had dozens of legislators tell me on town hall phone calls, on meetings in their communities, housing's an issue, we gotta address housing, we gotta get it out as soon as possible. Childcare's an issue. I said, the reason I did all this stuff in my budget is because you asked me to. It's just really strange that we're in this situation with disagreement.
You know, we focused a lot in the press and in the halls of the Capitol about these one-time projects that have big dollar amounts, but those are separate from the general bill
Right.
that's gonna be passed. What's the sticking point in the general bill? Because that's where your 6% increases that you're calling for would be. Is that the issue that, you know, there's some uncertainty that if they're gonna get a deal done?
There's no way to do a sales tax reduction on food or eliminate the sales tax on food and do 6%. Or unless you got a budget hole, and unless they offer up cuts to programs. And none of this debate, none of them have done that. So while they go and propose eliminating the sales tax on food, I understand that debate. We had, when I was in the legislature, I was on the tax committee, vice chair of tax committee, we debated that every year. And so that is certainly something I'm familiar with, to bring it up the last week and then not offer cuts to make it actually work, or not to be palms up and say, if we do this, then you can't give 6% to education, you can't increase teacher salaries, you can't pay healthcare providers, and you can't increase wages for state employees, because that's an honest debate, and they're not having that right now.
I haven't had a chance to talk with the appropriators since the food sales tax bill was killed in the Senate
Well,
this
that's because
morning.
they're upstairs meeting behind closed doors with
Yeah.
the Attorney General.
And apparently other folks too, but I'm trying to ferret that out, but we had to come do this quickly. But, but though that's been killed twice now, is that, you still think that they're angling for that?
For the what? For the sales tax
cut?
Jeff, you tell me, you're in negotiations with them every day, or
Yeah.
constantly all day.
I think that they have let that go in the Senate for sure. You know, that cutting the sales tax or the sales tax on food. One of the things that we did, weeks ago was try to put together, you know, a page on basically a presentation that the governor did. I just started scrambling notes on one of these things that she started talking about related to sustainability. And I think I gave this to you maybe weeks ago about how we're worried about GDP and the economy and inflation and federal policies impact on South Dakota, and South Dakota real issues, such as the governor mentioned with input costs, not only gas, but seed, you know, fertilizer, pesticides are just skyrocketing. And so, you know, our ag community is, you know, a South Dakota issue related to our budget. You know, and so going through just kind of this deal really, I think, resonated with the senators, that they looked at it and said, we get it, you know, in terms of cutting sales tax, how does that impact the sustainability of what we're gonna do? And I think there's a number of people in the House that actually understand that too, and have said, you know, it's a concern right now. I think the economy, South Dakota wise, and I don't know if the chair of appropriations has, you know, looked at the recent economy in the last couple of weeks, it's not that great. You know, and looking at inflation, looking at geopolitical conflict, its impact, looking at the stock market and its forward look to what's potentially coming down the pike. Those are not all really rosy type things that are going on in the last few weeks, so.
I mean, we've had a great year. We've had a great couple of years in South Dakota.
Yep.
We've done well. Ag has held steady and tourism knocked it out of the park, and so we've got extra revenue this year. I'm just asking people to be objective when they look to the future. We've already had one of our major airlines cut a third of their flights to South Dakota next year because of fuel costs, because of what they're seeing in the economy. So we know a third less people will have, or a third less opportunities for people to fly into South Dakota and visit next year. So we're already seeing that decision be made and happening. So to be realistic, we just have to, we consider all those things, and economists look at that. And that's the approach that I think, we've always been conservative budgeters here in South Dakota, so we don't overspend. Some of the proposals that are coming, you know, we really have to evaluate if they're priorities for the state and if we should be doing them.
You know, the source of all this seems to be the House Appropriations Committee. When's the last time you spoke with Representative Carr directly?
He hasn't come to any of our leadership meetings. Not for weeks. So Chair Carr doesn't come to the leadership or appropriation meetings. Spencer Gosh came to one, the speaker, which typically the speaker is pretty, you know, a big part of it. So, Kent Peterson has come, and, the Senate comes. But I would say as far as Chair Carr and the speaker, they haven't participated.
You guys have, you know, quick estimate, 30-plus years of legislative experience here at this table. Can you compare it to any other legislative session as far as kind of the tumult between these
This is
factions?
Joe's way of saying we're old. Well, I don't, but I was only here for 4 years and went to Congress, but it's very, very different from my time when I was here in '07 through '10. And I was Assistant Majority Leader in the House, and we as a House came up with priorities, the Senate did, then we brought a united budget to the governor, and then negotiated together. But we always, had good open policy debates, cause in South, I mean, I don't have anything I'm hiding. It's everything I'll be willing to talk about. We had all the Democrats in my office had a fantastic conversation yesterday. So I don't know why this is so broken. Larry?
Well, this marked my 20th session, 16 as a legislator and 4 now as lieutenant governor. Yeah, by far the worst that I've seen. It's always tough, especially in the session, because, you have a lot of 105 legislators with 105 opinions, but we had a process then, that would get us through to the end of the day where you're having the honest policy discussions and not worrying about the process. Now the process is so flawed and broken down, just with one weak link, which is the House Appropriations Committee, that it's derailed the whole process. And so we can have the meaningful policy discussions and move the ball forward on policy. We're too wrapped around the axles on all these personalities and sideline campaigns and all the other background noise.
One of the things that's been helpful that I've shared is the 4 buckets that we're talking about.
I'm getting the opinion you're into visuals.
I like visuals, yes. So I just think we've talked to a number of, everyone becomes an appropriator at the end of session.
Yeah, that's true.
Every legislator, 105 appropriators. And, we just talk about the specials that are out there, the special appropriations
So the
that are
one-time
out there.
projects.
The one-time projects, building projects have to be special. 2022 is the prior year G bill. Then you have
General bill,
the
which
general
is
bill.
last year's,
Finishing up,
last year.
yep. And then state aid to education with the levy bill that we do. And then finally, next year's bill, 2023. So I've shared that this really is the 4 buckets that we're dealing with, but oftentimes we'll float between them really fast, as we talk about them, but it's.
Well, and I had a conversation with a legislator yesterday, said, well, if we killed the women's prison and we killed the gun range project, then those dollars can go towards the food sales tax reduction. And I go, well, no, you can't. Those are big different buckets, because those are one-time projects, one-time spending. If you take the sales tax off food, that's forever, every year. So that's ongoing revenue that you have to take out of every future budget. So a lot of these one-time projects, you have to use the one-time money for, and then account for those bleeders, which we call them. They just, they're what we have to look at as future revenue is something that has to be accounted for forever.
It became clear that there was some friction around the budget when the daycare grants.
yeah.
I mean, that's sort of the first part of the session when we all started talking about budget, and spending authority was the big question there. The House appropriators argue that, with all this new money coming from ARPA, specifically some of these daycare dollars, the executive branch didn't have the authority to spend them. You guys argue that you do, and precedent is such that, in the past, when there's smaller dollar amounts, there hasn't been question about this.
Right.
Is that there wasn't consensus reached on that issue in February? Is that part of why things are troublesome now?
There was consensus reached on it. In fact, even when we started having phone calls, they all said, get help to daycare providers as soon as you can. They're closing their doors. A big part of our workforce challenges are people can't get childcare. We had these grants already within our Department of Social Services. That was a federal grant that came to us. We had the money. And hearing that from legislators, we immediately ran an application process to get our daycare providers help. Now, they did not recognize that it wasn't a new program we were creating. We already had the dollars. It said it could be used for this, so that's how we used it, according to what they told us to do. For some reason, some of them thought, clearly, because we talked about childcare on all these town halls and we'd visited about it, that we needed to address childcare when they came here in the budgeting process. And we said, well, we're already doing it, because we had a federal authority and we had these grants, so we're already doing it. It doesn't have to be in my budget. And that's why they thought, well, did she even have the authority to do it? The governor and the agencies and departments have always had federal authority to accept and disperse federal grants. They always have. I'm only doing what every other governor has ever done, always. What the House Appropriations Committee is trying to do is to say that every time we get a federal grant in any agency or department, that I have to come to them and ask permission before I can accept it and before I can disperse it. Well, a lot of these federal grants, they change. The guidance on them changes. A lot of times, cities and counties are waiting for those dollars just to flow through us. And it's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of grants every single year. I mean, it's a lot of money. And if the Appropriations Committee has to have a debate and approval and a stamp of approval on every single grant, they'll just stop. And, you know, the reality of it, Jeff certainly knows, but it's unworkable. And actually what they came in and told me they wanted to do and propose in a bill is against state law. This is what the Appropriations Committee, it's against state law. We'd have to change our statutes. We'd have to create a whole new budgeting process to account for it the way that they want me to. And it's bad government. It's less transparent for the public. Right now, the public can go at these agency and departments' budgets and see clearly how the money's being spent. They want me to take all these federal grants and dump them into one bucket, and I'd never be able to tell if I was a normal Joe Blow out on the street how it was spent or what it was appropriated for, because it would divert into different buckets after that. And I just said, I'm not doing it. If you guys don't want to do a budget on time this week, I'm okay with that. Listen, I can sit here till July. I am not in a hurry. So they're the ones that are all panicked about getting out of here because they're tired and they're tired of debating and they have vacations planned and they want to go. I don't have to go anywhere. So I will sit here until we do it right, but I'm not going to let them create bad government, less transparency and more bureaucracy because they want to check the box and say, oh, we forced the governor to do something and go home and spend the rest of the year kicking me in the head for it.
You know, when I said there wasn't necessarily consensus reached on that issue, I guess I was referring to the Attorney General's memo, which isn't legal binding, but I want to let Mark get in on the conversation. Maybe you want to respond to that.
Joe, what I would add is that, you know, to discuss it as, to set it up as disagreement is a bit of an exaggeration. The Senate passed a resolution, 35-0, agreeing with the governor and the administration's position. And in fact, even in the House, we're only talking about a bare minority in the House that disagrees. A majority of the House on vote.
Disagrees on that the governor has the authority to do this.
They took votes on bills that were effectively proxies for this question, and they went with the governor every time. And so there really is not much of a disagreement. And even the memo from the Attorney General, he simply, to give him a little bit of credit here, he is cabined by what the question was that was put to him. And the chair of Approbes, Representative Carr, put a question to him that really didn't address what were the underlying legal issues. So to the extent the Attorney General said what he said, it really wasn't relevant to what the underlying dispute was, that the Senate had agreed with Governor Noem, and even, as I said, the majority in the House had agreed with Governor Noem.
So his memo was more just generally speaking that, yes, dollars need to be appropriated, but he didn't hone in on the issue that they gave you guys authority last year in the budget.
That's fair. That's a fair way to put it. At least a piece of the explanation, yes.
Yeah. How are we doing on time? Since we have D. Partridge here in the room. Part of the issue around the sales tax reduction, folks characterize it as fulfilling a promise made in 2016. Should we start collecting sales tax on online sales? You know, that you were a legislator then, you had offered that amendment. Can you maybe explain in your mind why that Partridge Amendment hasn't been triggered yet?
Well, the Partridge Amendment hasn't been triggered because the dollar amount hasn't been reached. So it was very clear that $20 million of online sales needed to be reached before any type of cut. And so I don't know what promise hasn't been kept on that because the growth of online sales tax has not been reached. I would just say they were conflating online with all other sales tax in their argument to try to use it as a way to accomplish, their goal of cutting government without a plan. You've gotta have a plan to cut government, trim government, and look people in the eye and tell them that we're gonna be cutting your budget and your people. And they don't seem to be able to do that. So I would just say that's what was interesting related to, the fact that we went back to sustainability and talked about ongoing revenues inside this economy with all the issues that we're facing and felt like it was irresponsible.
Well, nothing's ever dead till signing die up here. What's your level of optimism that there'll be a deal on workforce housing and potentially bringing back these other two?
Right now, I don't know, I mean, I think you've noted before in your reporting that, we still have water projects up in the air. The proposal that the appropriators brought to us yesterday as far as the housing package puts all the money under the housing authority, which is less accountable to taxpayers. Actually, they don't even set the budget for the housing authority.
Even the 50 million that,
Well, that's ARPA funding, but they're putting the full state revenue. The most money we've ever given to the housing authority as a state is $1 million. They're proposing to put, I think, 150 million over to the housing authority, and they don't even set their budget. I appoint the leader of the housing authority, but they don't set their budget and they have no accountability to them. And they're giving them 150 times more money than they've ever given them before. And the policy they've backed it up with says it can't be spent on any infrastructure. So what they're doing is saying now it can't be used to develop the infrastructure, which was the whole purpose of the program. I guess what it'll do is actually build houses. I don't know.
It's a real question as to how it would work.
Which is basically Section 8 housing and low-income housing, which is what the housing authority and the federal government do. State government doesn't. That's the one thing I said going into the session is we shouldn't create new programs. We have to take care of people we're responsible for. So building facilities for prisons should be much more important than giving more authority to a department or agency we have less accountability with. But, that's some of the debate that's up in the air. There's a lot of money that's still up in the air here. And I just want to I think everybody's kind of panicked, thinking there's only 2 or 3 days left of session. We got time. It's not like, we're not like the federal government where we can't open the doors next week. So I'll be here and we'll be here. And if they don't give me a responsible budget that's transparent and the right thing to do for the people of South Dakota, I'm not gonna accept it. And I just think that, because we don't have to be in a hurry, and we don't have to be in such a hurry that we do it wrong and do it bad. I'm just not gonna be a part of that.
do you think you'll get it done or they'll get it done before June, as like 95 years ago, it took till June for the legislature to work through this, and I think that's
That's
the
a
only
long
time
time
it
ago.
went beyond veto
I don't think
day.
so. I think that we can do better than that. I think we could get it done this week if they realize the reality. And it's been a long time, I think it's been weeks since they've had a conversation about the 6%, since they had a conversation about where the true dollars are. So the Senate has been good to work with. They've been good and been a part of the discussion. The House has been a very different story. But I also think there's how many former chairs of appropriations are in the House?
3.
3 that are there that the speaker chose not to even put on appropriations. They've been through this dozens of times before, and they all say this is broken. They can't figure out what's going on this year. So there's a lot of experience in the House and a lot of good members there that see their own dysfunction and wish that they were in a position of authority to fix it.
I wonder the history of that 95 years ago. Was it because revenues were high and they were on a cusp of the Depression maybe?
Well, actually, the way I understand it, there was a Democrat governor at the time who thought the Republican legislature's outlook was too rosy.
Too rosy,
And
okay.
he wanted to spend less than what the legislature did, and it ended up, he vetoed the budget. They fell short of overriding it, it went to the Supreme Court, and then they had to have a special session, and they got it done in June, right, just in time before the new fiscal year started, so,
Was that Governor Barry?
No.
Governor
Buelow.
Buelow.
yeah.
And Governor Buelow, at the end of the day, won the case in the Supreme Court unanimously, and then ultimately got the budget he wanted. He called them back into session in late June, and they got that budget done. But as the governor said, we shouldn't have to get there. There's plenty of time for the House leadership to take the,
Well, and we may be going backwards, because joint appropriations was just upstairs having a meeting with the Attorney General behind closed doors, without the public present, and I don't know why. So what are they debating, what are they discussing, and if it's his budget, that's something that should have happened
In the open.
2 months ago and at least in the public, so people know what they're talking about. What are they talking about? And we're doing this with 2 weeks left, 2 days left this week, so.
Well, there's a lot to get done in
Yep.
the next 2.5 days, so we'll see how far they get,
We may be doing this again tomorrow, Joe.
maybe, so.
We'll be here,
Well-
ready to work.
well, thank you
All day,
for-
all night.
Thank you for the
Thank
time
you.
and the
You bet.
opportunity, so, thanks a
bet.
lot.
Thank
you,
you.
Joe.